Here is my recap on Dexter Season 7, Episode 1, entitled, Dexter, Are You? Let's talk about what happened in this episode. This was a great episode. This episode was also already better than anything they did in Season 6. We pick up with Dexter on the run. He's trying to get an airline ticket to Ukraine. He is headed out of Miami, and we're led to believe that this is what he has done as a result of Deborah finding out who he is. But that's not the case. That's only part of the story. So it then flashes back to Dexter and Deborah right after the kill there with Travis. This is very much a continuation of what happened in the last season, and it picks up right where that one left off. She's there with Dexter. Dexter tries to talk his way out of the situation. She's like, how can you be so prepared for this? He's like, well, I'm an analyst. And he says, we could take care of this. He goes, I had a moment of passion. I killed him. He tries to explain his way out of the situation, but, Deborah's really smart. That's the way they built her up over the last 7 seasons, and she's not buying it, and she's very curious. So she's questioning everything. And he talks about, well, I had, all this stuff because I'm an analyst and yada, yada, yada. And he goes on and he goes, what we can do is, she wants to call it in. He says, no, we can't do that. If we do that, it's going to ruin both of our lives, especially mine. I'll lose Harrison. This was a moment of passion. Let's get rid of the body. He goes, I know what I'm talking about. And she's like, what the heck? He then describes about how they can go get gas and make it look like a suicide because the world didn't end. Travis then in shame, commit suicide. So that's what they decide to do. He sends her off to get some gas. He prepares the scene, gets rid of all the plastic, all the stuff that could have tied them to the scene. And what you see is that one of his blood slides that he took from Travis falls down into the grate right below where the table was, where he did kill Travis, and it falls down in there. And so they do set fire to the church. So everybody shows up. Deborah is like freaking out still. She's got a lot of questions, does confront Dexter later at his apartment, asking him more questions about being so prepared. And he said, it's because I'm a blood analyst. He talks his way out of it some more. They have to get to work. She's still questioning everything. At the same time, we have Mike, who was the detective that Deborah brought in last season in the first episode. And he's still around on his way home that night. And he ends up getting shot and killed by some Ukrainian guy who had killed some girl and stuffed him in the trunk. Mike stopped to help him, and the guy ends up shooting him and leaving him dead and taking Mike's car. So the next day they find Mike's car abandoned at some warehouse or something. And Dexter does some detective work there around the car and actually he goes, they're not going to find any fingerprints. He goes, the one place people forget to clean fingerprints off of is the turn signal. So he takes it off of the turn signal and finds out who this guy is. He is a Ukrainian official. Couldn't find any results in the US. So he looked at Interpol and found out who this guy was and that he was leaving on a flight to Ukraine. So Dexter hightails it to the airport. And now at the same time, before Dexter went to work, he ends up telling Dexter before they end up going to this crime scene where Mike is, he'll be right behind her. He's got a few things he's got to get together. She doesn't want to leave him alone, but he's like, look, I'll be 2 minutes behind you. And then that's when he goes into his bedroom and busts the wall open behind his door. And you find out he's got a getaway bag. If he ever got caught, he had some burner phones in there, some passports, money, other things so if he needed to make a fast getaway, he could. And that's what he's telling the audience is that, if Deborah pushes too hard, I'll just leave. We've got that going on. So Dexter does end up going and he kills this guy, and he's having some internal monologue. He gets him at the airport and actually kills him there at the airport and then goes and dumps his body. At the same time, Deborah's looking at old photos and starts freaking out because she was held by Rudy, Dexter's brother, in plastic, and she starts putting 2 and 2 together. And finally, Dexter is on his way home. And Deborah ends up, she's freaking out still. And late that night, she's running, she's jogging on a treadmill she has at home. And she calls Dexter's house to talk to Dexter because things are still bothering her. And he's not there. That's when she talks to Batista's sister, who is there watching Harrison, and asks, does Dexter go out late a lot like this? She goes, oh, yeah, he's out till 3:00 in the morning a lot of times, but, things are good. This makes her very curious. So we see her leave her apartment, and that's all we see of her for the time being. Dexter is then dumping the body off of that Ukrainian guy. He ends up going back home, and just as he gets home, he opens up the door, and there's Deborah, who has torn his whole apartment apart. found his slides, found his knives, found everything. And that's when she looks at him and says, are you a serial killer? And he says, yes. And that's when it goes to black. Now, we do have another storyline going on, too, where, I talked about that slide dropping off of the kill with Travis. Well, that slide is part of the evidence there. And LaGuerta goes in to talk to Masuka about the evidence they have in bags there. And she sees the slide and she goes, does anybody in the department use slides? Why would there be a blood slide at the crime scene? And he said there wouldn't be. The only person that ever did that was Dokes back in season 2, who was the Bay Harbor Butcher. And that's when LaGuerta starts putting 2 and 2 together. So she's going to start zeroing in on Dexter as well. Now, I don't remember anything about this season. Like, this to me was like the most newest episode that I can remember. I don't know why I don't remember a whole lot about this season. I know I've seen it, but I don't remember a lot about it. And this has Jason Gedrick in it, who was the lead in Iron Eagle back in the 80s, which is a movie I love. And he's in this. And usually I would remember stuff like that. I'd totally forgotten that he was in it. I mean, it does bring back a little bit, but for some reason, I'm just having brain fog when it comes to remembering this season. So this is going to be like a new watch for me. But he's in it, and they do ID the girl also who was killed in the trunk by this Ukrainian guy. They go to where she was working. She was a working girl, and nobody there can seem to remember who she was or that she left there. And Jason Gedrick is the owner of that particular bar. Well, later he ends up calling some guy in Ukraine, talking about what had happened, and that the guy who did the kill was actually going to show up in Ukraine in like 10 hours. And so that's what they're expecting, is that he's going to come off that flight, but they don't know that Dexter has killed this guy. So we've got some Ukrainian officials involved in this. We're going to see where this season goes. I'll be on this ride along with you guys. So there's my recap on the first episode. It did end with Dexter admitting he is a serial killer. So we're going to see what happens in episode 2 of season 7. We'll see you guys on the next recap.